All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Marcus Holmes. I am the sales engineer here at Zyxel North America. Today, we're going to be talking about VPNs and how to configure them within both the Nebula interface on the cloud portal and on the local side GUI. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you have any questions, you can type them into the section where you can actually put in the chat, and then I will answer your questions at the very end of the webinar. So if you see something you have a question about, just go ahead and write it down, and then I will go ahead and tackle that at the very end. So again, this is a tech talk about our VPNs. We want to make it as simple as possible for you and kind of talk about the differences between configuring them in Nebula and in the local GUI. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about a couple of things here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Nebula cross-sync. So if you are on the latest firmware for your firewall, which is going to be on the FLEX H series, and that's going to be the 1.35 or greater, what you will find is that we now have a new option that's pretty much standard, which is our cross-sync. So what is it meant by cross-sync? Well, previously with the H series, you had your standalone mode, and then you also had your cloud managed mode. Now, cloud managed mode can see things that you already had configured, but it didn't share the configuration 100%. Now with this latest update, whenever you make a change on the Nebula side, it will sync to the local side GUI and vice versa. So that means you have two different options when it comes to configuring your firewall. So you can configure it in the Nebula cloud if you wish to do so, or you can configure it in the local GUI. We still have the option for the remote configurator, meaning that you can log into Nebula and use the remote configurator to access the local GUI of the firewall. So that still remains the same. We've kept that, it was supposed to be a Pro Pack feature, but that's something that we've actually made as a free option. So you still have the ability to log into your Nebula account, bring up your firewall, and then access the local GUI. Now, the reason why that is still there is because while we are reaching full parity between the Nebula Control Center and the local side GUI, there are some things that just haven't been added on the Nebula side. So, for instance, if there is a situation where you need to access a feature that's not present in Nebula, then you can log into the local GUI, and that will give you the option and the availability to make that configuration change. Now, that being said, even if that configuration doesn't exist, that option doesn't exist in Nebula, it still exists on the local GUI. It's just not present or displayed on the Nebula side. So rest assured, if you make that configuration change on the local GUI, it'll still be present. It just won't show up on the Nebula interface, which eventually will have full parity between the two. So that's basically what the Nebula cross sync will do, and it's very helpful because I'll actually show you a demo here in a little bit where if we make a change on the Nebula side, you'll see that that change reflects on the GUI and vice versa. So that's where we'll start with that first, and then we will go into configuring or how to set up a site-to-site VPN, and then we'll also talk about the client-to-site VPN. Now, there are some things that I need to point out really quick. So on the local GUI side, when it comes to VPNs, we do still support SSL VPN. We do not support that on the Nebula side. So if you do need to make a configuration that requires SSL VPN, you're going to have to log into the local side GUI to set that up, as it is not present on the Nebula Control Center. There's no word as to whether it will be implemented, but my understanding is that it most likely will not be. Secondly, there is another option for VPNs on the FLEX H series, and that's Tailscale VPN. We have integrated that. It's been integrated for a while now, and it is integrated into the Zyxel FLEX H series. Now, I'm not going to cover that today because that deserves its own webinar, which I will do sometime in the future to kind of go over how to set up a Tailscale VPN. But just understand that with Tailscale VPN, there is no option to configure it on, it doesn't take, let's see, it basically is not available. The Tailscale VPN is not available on the cloud side. I don't have any information as to when or if that will be made available, but just know that if you need to configure Tailscale VPN or want to set that up, you will have to do that on the local side GUI. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually jump into a demo. So that's where we're going to talk about our site-to-site VPN on the live demo. So let me go ahead and spin that up real quick, and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, here we go. And let me share my new screen. Okay. So what we have here is I'm going to show you both sides here. So this is going to be the Nebula dashboard. And on the Nebula side dashboard, I have two tabs here. I have a tab that's actually using the remote GUI. So if you ever want to get to the remote GUI, all you need to do is click on the firewall section or the firewall tab on your dashboard. You need to scroll down to remote configurator and then click the establish button, and it will create a link to open up a tunnel, a secure tunnel to open up the local site GUI. So let's go ahead and start with a site-to-site VPN. So within Nebula, if you go to configure and then you go to site-to-site on the firewall, you'll see that we have Nebula SD VPN and we have manual link. Now, Nebula SD VPN is more designed for users who already have Nebula devices, or they have firewalls in Nebula. And this allows you to create the firewall with a simple click of the button, or sorry, create the VPN with a simple click of the button. So in order to do that, I don't have multiple VPNs set up on this particular demo, but if I did, I can just click enable to enable the VPN, and then I had to select a default area or VPN area. So VPN areas basically define what VPNs are defined. And again, I only have one firewall set up, so I can't show you that full demo. But what we can do with this is we can set up a VPN topology. So we can do a hub and spoke or a site-to-site. If you choose to do hub and spoke, we can choose which ones are the hubs. So if I had multiple devices, they would show up in this drop-down list, allowing me to select multiple hubs. And then, of course, in our advanced options, we can set up so that each of the branches of the VPN, meaning each of the spokes, can speak to each other. And then, of course, all of the network information will be populated down here. So this is something that is actually unique to Nebula. This isn't found on the local GUI side. This is just a specific Nebula option, and this comes standard on our Nebula on the platform. There's no extra cost or licensing to be able to access this. So this is more defined for if you have specific firewalls that are like the Flex H series or even the ATP or the regular Flex. It allows you to build out a hub and spoke VPN rather quickly and building the routes. Now, for those users who choose to only just do a regular site-to-site VPN with a manual link, that's what this option is up here, our manual link VPN. So there are been some enhancements in 1.36, which you will see right now. If we click on add, one of the first things you will actually begin to see that has been asked for quite some time is now we do support the option to have a primary and secondary VPN gateway address, meaning that if you have a remote gateway that has a dual WAN, you can specify the primary and the secondary WAN interfaces, meaning that the VPN will connect on the main IP address, the primary. It will connect on the primary, and then if the connectivity check, there's an option here for a connectivity check, and it will fall back to the primary if the primary comes back on. So the primary goes down, it connects, it builds the tunnel off the secondary, and then it will automatically keep checking at a specific interval and pinging that WAN 1 interface, and it will fail the VPN back over. So this is an option that was not available in Nebula, and it is now available as of the latest Nebula update. So again, on the local side, if we take a look at the local side here, if we go to configuration and we go over to VPN, and IPsec VPN, again, we'll see something very similar. So for a site-to-site VPN, as it loads up, you click on add, and you'll be presented with a wizard. Now, technically, I don't go through the wizard. I just set it up as custom because that allows me to make all the changes necessary that I need. So one of the things you'll see on this screen as it loads up is you'll see if I flip between the two screens on site-to-site VPN and on the local GUI, you'll see that the options are pretty much very similar here. So of course, up here we have all of our all of our information as to the primary and secondary gateway. On the local GUI, we have our primary and secondary gateway. So we can choose whether we want to use our interface IP address or our domain IP address. Okay, so we can choose either of those as well. Next, of course, we have our primary and our secondary, and then here we just have a tick, the option to turn on the failback, and then of course the check interval. On the Nebula side, it's pretty much the same. You have the option for the failback and the check interval. If you choose to do a dynamic IP address, meaning that the opposite end is using a dynamic IP address, you would simply select that that option. And so that basically means that the gateway has a dynamic IP address, and that means that the other side is going to be the one that's dialing in. So you see that the options are pretty much very similar, going from the local side to the remote side. Down here, of course, we have our phase 1 settings. Our phase 1 settings here, we can choose our encryption algorithms, and again, on the local GUI, again, we can do the exact same thing. So it pretty much defaults the same way between the two. And then we also have our phase 2 settings. Now, what you're going to see here is this is going to be an additional, this box here is an additional setting that was just added to the FLEX H series on the GUI. Now, you'll notice that on the Nebula side, we don't have, we have that same kind of policy here for our initiation. We have our auto, and then we have our policy. Now, what this policy allows us to do is we can create specific routes for the policy, meaning that we have a local and remote, meaning that if we want the local side to hit the remote's LAN subnet or LAN 2 or LAN 3, we can add in multiple subnets for that. So if you have a remote endpoint that has maybe a specific device or a specific subnet that needs to be reached, we can then implement that with a policy on our phase 2, meaning that we're no longer just bound to the local and one local and one remote subnet. We can actually provide multiple local subnets and multiple remote subnets for the VPN to traverse when you need to send traffic. This means that if you have, say, a split network where you have maybe a share or a group of shares on a specific subnet, and then maybe some IP cameras that you want to have accessible to the VPN that's on another subnet, we can apply those subnets as remote subnets on the policy. So this option is available on both the local side and on the GUI side as well. Okay, so we pretty much have a matching setup on both the local GUI and on the Nebula side. So this gives you an idea of basically how to set up an IPsec VPN for site to site. Pretty straightforward. Now, I'd like to touch on something a little bit more, that gets a little bit more depth. Let's talk about a VPN with client to site. So if I go over to our local GUI and I go to IPsec VPN, and I go back up here to the top where it says remote access VPN, this is where we actually have a couple of options. So let me go back to the Nebula just here really quick, and we're going to go back up to the configure option. And now we've removed previously the remote access VPN was its own tab here, but we have now moved it to its own section under Remote Access VPN. Go ahead and cancel out these changes real quick so we can go back. There we go. Now, Remote Access VPN. So with Remote Access VPN, you'll notice that it uses the Nebula assigned DNS name or domain name, and it does that by default. And that's going to be extremely helpful because when we create a Remote Access VPN, excuse me, when we create the Remote Access VPN, we actually use a script, which is downloadable. And this script will download and install using the native client in iOS and Windows. For Android users, you'll have to use Strong Swan VPN to get that connected. But if we look on the local GUI, you'll actually see that we have the VPN download script. Now, I'm going to show you something really quick in terms of the Nebula sync. You'll see that we also now have the option for Nebula assigned domain name, which pops up right here. And this gets put into the script when it installs, because that way, instead of pointing to an IP address, we now can point to the Nebula assigned domain name that points to the IP address on the WAN. So let's go over here really quick, and let's change this to interface, okay? And we'll change this to GE1, and then we'll leave everything as default and save it, okay? So it's throwing an error right now, but that's fine. We've changed the VPN to interface type. Now, if I go back over to our firewall and go back to our VPN, notice how it says Nebula assigned domain name right here. As I go back to the VPN, go to IPsec VPN, and we go back to the Remote Access VPN, as it loads, it'll take a second, it is now synced. It now shows that the change that we made in the Nebula side has synced over. So it's rather quick. It takes a couple of seconds. Of course, you know, it just depends on your network traffic, but it just takes a couple of seconds for it to sync over. We've now synced it over, and we've made that change in Nebula, but now that change has propagated over to our local interface. And we actually can do the same thing in reverse. We do have the option for Nebula assigned domain name as well for our VPN address type. So if I do that, apply the change, and then wait for it to apply. Change has been applied, and we're going to wait for this to load back up again. So we've made that change, Nebula domain name. Go back to the Remote Access VPN. Go back to Configure, Remote Access VPN. Let me actually click out of the menu first because it needs to load. Back to Remote Access VPN. As it loads up, we're now back to Nebula assigned domain name. So you can see how it does sync. It does take a couple of seconds to sync over. It's not super instantaneous, but it's rather quick still. So, and they are going to be making some improvements to make it even faster. So as of right now, that's how the Nebula sync works. Now, in terms of setting up a Remote Access VPN, we have a couple of options for our sign-on options. So with the local GUI, normally what you would do is you would set up your authentication. So the primary authentication is set to local by default, and of course the user is set to any. Now you can create your users locally on the firewall itself. However, we have added an option now. We can now choose Nebula Cloud Authentication. And what Nebula Cloud Authentication basically means is that if we go over to our cloud authentication, so we go to Configure and we go to Cloud Authentication, we can actually create users in the cloud. So instead of using the local-based firewalls, kind of like Radius server, we can create specific users for our VPN. So we can do the account as user, we can have them log in by username or email or both, because we have an option to log in by email, log in by username, or log in by both. When you create this user, you can actually also email the account information to the user. So as you're setting up your VPNs, if you want to set up a user for, say, John, and you give him his username, you can have it automatically generate a password for you. So you can click it, it'll create a randomized password, and that password information you can send that to them, or you can tell them what that information is. But it will say that when they get an account, it'll say that their account has been created in their name, and then you can automatically authorize them, meaning that they don't have to create an account or anything. It'll be automatically registered to them. Now, what we also can do with this particular user is we can also assign them to a VLAN. So if you already have VLAN set up on your network, let's just say that you have VLAN 100 for your marketing team, and then VLAN 200 is for guests, and maybe VLAN 300 is for your warehouse team that's working on scanning product with their scan guns. Basically, what you can do is put them on a specific VLAN. Now, just be aware that this is a Nebula Pro Pack feature to use this option. But if you do not care about doing VLAN assignments based on users, you can go ahead and skip this. But what this basically means now for that user is if we go back to our remote access VPN and we decide that we want to use the option for the authentication to be through we want the authentication to be through the Nebula authentication, we can actually use that particular user for Nebula authentication. So that option is there for you if you want to use Nebula authentication. But as of right now, we have it set to any, but you can still use that for your authentication option. So sign on with local users. We have AD or Radius server if you choose to use your own Radius server, or you can use the local users, which points to the local firewalls, users that you set up as address objects, or Nebula authentication. When you set it up as Nebula authentication, it does give you the option to add the account directly from here. Now, when it comes to downloading the script, you can download them from either here or on the local GUI. So when you download it, you'll get a zip file that contains all of the scripts for Windows, iOS devices, and for Strong Swan VPN. Now, for iOS users, it doesn't matter if you are on an iPad or an iPhone, it'll still work, but we found that it works best that when you get the script file, again, it's in a zip file, there'll be subfolders for Windows, a subfolder for Mac OS or iOS, and then a subfolder for the Android. When you get the script for your iOS, we found it best that when you email that script out, you need to email it to an iCloud address that's bound to that user's phone. The reason being is that when you open it up in the native Mail app, it'll automatically, you click on it, it'll automatically install the script, or it'll prepare the script to be installed in your settings. And from there, what you do is you go into your settings, and there's a button you click to install the script directly onto the phone. Now, rest assured that nobody, even if they get the script, they can't just install it without using, they need the credentials. So the credentials that they'll need is they'll need a specific user. So if we have a user created here on the ad account, and we've created a specific user and their password, they have to enter in that username and password during the script installation, or it will not work. So that's just an extra added layer of security when installing the script. So even if somebody got a hold of the script by some means and they tried to install it, they won't be able to actually connect to the VPN because the script requires you to pass the authentication, meaning that it has to be a username and a password that is found on your network. So basically, it has to authenticate. Even if they put in whatever username and password they want, the VPN will not connect. It will automatically just fail. So moving along here, we have other options here. We can choose how the clients use the VPNs. So we do support full tunnel mode and split tunnel mode. So full tunnel mode basically means that all the traffic will be pushed through the VPN. So that means that when you're connected on your iPhone, or if you're connected on your Windows machine, when you're connected to the VPN, if you are under a full tunnel, that basically means that if you were to do an IP lookup, the IP lookup won't come from your phone. It'll come from the gateway that you're connected to. So that's full tunnel mode. If you choose to do a split tunnel mode, you'll need to specify the network that you want them to have access to. So if you want them only to have access to a specific LAN port or a LAN range or LAN subnet, you will put that information in, meaning that if they try to access a resource on that subnet, the traffic is pushed through the tunnel. Everything else outside of that subnet range basically will be using their own local network. So that allows you to do a split tunnel. We do support both. Now, understand that should you make a change, if you decide to make a change here, so let's just say that you want to go full tunnel, you may need to actually re-download the script. So any changes you make here will need to require you to re-download and distribute the script out, mainly because the script is built off of what you have set here. So any changes, you'll have to redo the script and send them out to everybody. Now, lastly here, we have our client network. We do assign an IP address directly to the clients. So when they connect to the VPN, they will have their own subnet for the client-to-site VPN. And of course, down here, we have our phase 1 and phase 2 settings that you can set up. So phase 1, of course, we set it to 256 on AES and SHA for both with the highest encryption and then also our Diffie-Hellman group. These Diffie-Hellman groups I would leave as default because I know that there were some changes in, I believe, either in iOS or in Mac OS, I believe Sequoia, where you needed to have, I think it was DH19 or DH14 for the script to work properly. So I would leave these as defaults. I'll leave the Diffie-Hellman groups as they are. Messing with this could impact the script's ability to work properly when installing on Mac OS and iOS devices. Okay, and again, on the local side, it's basically the same thing here. We can do internet, local or remote when it comes to, or sorry, full tunnel or split tunnel. So the options are available here on both sides. And of course, under the advanced settings, we have, of course, our phase 1 and our phase 2 settings. So now when it comes to choosing whether or not to use the local GUI or the remote GUI, it comes down to a bit of preference. Realistically, when it comes to configuring the VPNs, they're roughly the same. You don't see too much of a difference between the two. Again, it does come down to if you are going to configure other types of VPNs. So again, we have support for SSL VPN and Tailscale on the local GUI, whereas in Nebula we don't. Now, in terms of convenience, again, you can access the local GUI directly through Nebula. So you have options for both. If you are more familiar with the local GUI, I know that there are people out there that are more familiar with how the look and feel of the local GUI is. I mean, by all means, you can use that remotely, or if you're local to the device, by all means, use the local GUI. The whole idea about providing you with that remote option through Nebula is so that you don't have to expose your firewall to the internet or exposing it to any other bad actors when you want to access the device remotely. I know years and years ago, we would always say, okay, we'll just put, open up port 443 or do 4443 and translate it over to 443. But you don't want to have any ports open. So with this remote configurator, you don't have to open up any ports. It's still secure. It just builds a secure tunnel back to the firewall where you can access it through Nebula. So here, this right here, this address is basically an address that was created on Nebula side for me to access the local side GUI. So it's a lot more secure than just opening up ports or setting up your own VPN if you want to do that as well. That works too, but this makes it a lot more convenient. Okay, so that's pretty much how we set up the VPNs in Nebula. Again, when it comes to your script download, this was something that wasn't supported. It was supported, but we took it away, but now we brought it back. And again, we now have everything contained within one zip download. So you don't have to worry about downloading multiple different scripts because we just have one download in a zip file that contains all of the scripts for Windows, iOS, and Strong Swan VPN. So with that, I know that there were some questions. I'm going to go ahead and actually begin to go through those questions. And let me go ahead and bring up our chat here to go through all the questions that was asked. So the first question that was asked was, how long does it take for the config changes to take effect on local and vice versa? I've seen, personally, from my own testing, I've seen anywhere from 30 seconds to about 45 seconds that I timed, and that's just going to be dependent on network traffic. So if you got a lot of network traffic, I know they try to improve the sync time. It used to be about 2 minutes, but now they've gotten it down to be pretty quick. So you shouldn't see too much of a lag when making those changes. Now, I will have to say, though, there are some interesting caveats when it comes to how things sync, and it's going to be really dependent on how you onboarded your device. There are options that you can do here, and I'll show you really quick. If you go to the dashboard, let's go ahead and say, let's cancel these changes really quick. There is an option here, which is pretty interesting, which, let me back out of this here. If we go over to the firewall section and bring up the actual firewall, you'll notice down here we have a configuration override. There it is. So, if your local GUI settings differ from the Nebula portal, you can click the configure override if you want to apply the current GUI to the Nebula settings. So if there's some reason why something has gone out of sync, you can have a configuration override, meaning that you can have the local GUI applied to Nebula. Maybe it missed its last sync, maybe something went wrong. If you notice it, you can actually use this option to do the configuration override. Does the purchase a Zyxel license for the new VPN app work for iPads? I'm guessing you're meaning the older Secu extender, I believe. So the way things work now is the Secu extender that we used to have, and we actually still offer it. So you'll see that we have the Secu extender. So the Secu extender for Mac and OS, if you don't want to use the built-in script, you have the option for using the Secu extender client VPN. That works specifically for Mac OS and Windows. Those are specifically only for those two OSs. The Secu extender client will not work on iPads or iPhones. So if you really do need to use an iPad or an iPhone, you need to use the configuration script to download. But if you already have licensed out the Secu extender, you can use these options. And one of the things about the Secu extender that's actually pretty great is on the Secu extender, if you choose to use that option, there's an option to get the configuration information from the server. So once you've already set up your VPN access within Secu extender, I don't have it installed on this machine, but within Secu extender, there's an option to get the configuration from the server, meaning that it will provision that client software for the IP subtunnel. All you would need to do is put in the IP address of your firewall and then put in a username and password, whether it be an admin account or whether it be an actual user. Once it has authenticated and verified your information, it will then download the provisioning script and install it for the Secu extender. So you don't have to worry about what your phase 1, your phase 2, or your encryption algorithms are, or what your pre-shared keys are set to, because it will automatically be set up within the script itself. Let's see. Can I see the installation script I can see the installation script was only in the local GUI. Are there plans to add that script to Nebula? Yeah, it's already there. So if you go to your remote access VPN, you have to enable your VPN first, because by default, if it's disabled and you don't have nothing set up, this will be downloaded, or sorry, it'll be grayed out for the download. But once you've actually configured your IPsec VPN, and actually I do make a mistake. There is actually the SSL. I do apologize. The SSL VPN is actually available on the cloud version, but you need to use the compatible SSL VPN Secu extender. So I do apologize on that mistake. Again, you can enable that, and we do have an SSL VPN configuration download that'll work with the Secu extender. So I did forget that they just added this back in again. It is available, but as far as the script for the VPN IPsec, all you would have to do is click on download, and it will download the script directly to your computer. It'll be a zip file that contains all of the different scripts for iOS, Windows, and Strong Swan VPN. Let's see, what is the difference between the Secu Extender VPN and the Windows VPN script? Well, the Secu Extender VPN has a few advantages over the script-based VPN. So one of the advantages is if you make a change on the remote access VPN. So let's go back over here to the remote access VPN. And if we make a change on any of these options here, you would have to re-download the script and resend them out to all of your users. Whereas if you make a change on here with the if you make a change on here and you're using the Secu Extender, all you would have to do is go back to the option to get from server and re-provision. So it's a lot quicker because you can actually initiate the script download to the Secu Extender. Whereas if you're using the built-in script here, you have to wait for the IT administrator to send that out. Another thing with the IPsec VPN Secu Extender is that there's an option to automatically have the VPN connect on Windows boot up. There's a couple of other options to automatically auto RDP as well. So not only can you have the Secu Extender connect on Windows, or connect when your OS starts up, there's also an option to have it automatically use RDP or any other host type connection to connect to a computer once that VPN tunnel connects up. So there's extra features on top of what's available with the Secu Extender, whereas the script version just uses the built-in options for iOS, Windows, and Mac OS and Android. So it's basically a cost issue. So if you would rather have something that's, that uses the native client and not have to purchase a license for software, then you can use the VPN script. However, I do find that the IPsec VPN Secu Extender does have extra features that I actually enjoy and I like, and I actually use that. But what I do is on my laptop, I'll have the Secu Extender to connect the VPN, and then when it comes to my mobile devices on my iOS device or an iPad, I will use the Secu Extenders, the VPN script, just because I'd rather use something that's built in and I don't have to worry about having a third-party app installed on my phone to manage my VPN. So I could use it as a native client. Another question, how does the client IP address pool and split tunnel work with assigning a VPN user to a VLAN? That's a good question. So with this section here, this is going to be the IP address pool that you are given if you're not using a VLAN. If you are a user that you want to put them on a specific VLAN, what you can do at that point is that particular user, once they're on that particular VLAN, when it connects up, if I remember correctly, it will try to establish with this IP address first, and then it will apply the VLAN IP address subnet to that user. It's either that or it does translations, but I'll have to look into finding that information out and get back to you. But I do believe, yes, it is possible still to do that. It will get an IP address from the correct pool. Is the config override just for a single seek? Yes, that is just for a single seek. If you find that your Nebula configuration is out of sorts, like say, for instance, this shows up on the Nebula side as IP address interface, but you look on Nebula and it's set to Nebula domain name, and you waited for the sync and it didn't happen, what you can do is you can force it to do an immediate sync because for some reason it didn't sync properly. Let's see, what would we need to use for iPads for IPsec VPN? Again, iPads, you would have to use the VPN configuration script. You just need to download that and send it to the iCloud address and then click install from the Mail app and go through. What you'll do is first, again, open up the Mail in the Mail app on the iOS device on the iPad, click the script to install, and then go into your settings on iOS, and there'll be a little section that says a remote profile has been installed, and you click on that to install it. All right, next question. I noticed the new Secu Extender has a bug. I added multiple IPsec VPN connections to it. When I connect to one, all of the connections show they're connected, even though I'm really connected only to one. Yeah, I think I have seen something about that, and I believe that there's going to be a fix to address that. But I will have to talk to our support staff to see what's going on with that. If you have created a case for that, I would check in with our support team on that particular ticket. But I do remember seeing something about that. I don't recall if you touched on this or anything or not, but how does VPN Orchestrator tie into everything? Okay, so VPN Orchestrator actually is going to be when it comes to the SD-WAN VPN, Nebula one. That's where the Nebula Orchestrator comes in. We actually do tie in a little bit of Nebula Orchestrator. So if you're configuring multiple sites, if it's too cumbersome, like if you're doing multiple sites, that's when you want to use VPN Orchestrator. If you're just doing a regular simple hub and spoke with maybe like 5 spokes in one hub, you can absolutely do this. However, if you're using multiple, and I'm talking about maybe in the 10s, 20s, 30s of VPNs, and you're trying to manage them all, and you want to do like maybe a unique or very complicated hub and spoke VPN, that's when you want to use VPN Orchestrator. So we still offer that. It does make it a lot more easier when you're dealing with multiple VPN hubs and spokes. But and again, those are only devices that are going to be Nebula managed. We don't use VPN Orchestrator for third-party devices. So if all of your sites are all, HCP FLEX H devices, and you're creating a VPN to connect them all together, and you have a very unique situation where there's different encryption algorithms and there's different policies, that's when you want to turn to VPN Orchestrator because that will handle that. But if it's very simplistic hub and spoke topology, one hub, a couple spokes, and you want to set up spoke-to-spoke transmission, you can use the Nebula SDVPN to set that up. But anything complicated, I would go through VPN Orchestrator. Okay, and that's all the questions I have that are here, but I'll go ahead and leave the floor open for the next 5 minutes if anybody has any additional questions. Again, I do apologize for the mistake on the SSL VPN. That actually is available under Remote Access VPN. You have to use the SECU extender for connecting SSL VPN. And we do support a script for that for the SSL VPN. So again, I do apologize for that mistake. You just have to configure your SSL VPN, and then you can download the script configuration for the SECU extender to download it and import it into the SECU extender software. Is it possible to migrate users in the local GUI into the Nebula Cloud? As of right now, no, there is not, because there is we have a user group. What you can do is, I know that we had an option to do it one way, but we don't have an option to do it the other way for certain tasks. But what I can do is I can definitely run that up the chains as a feature request, because I know that if you have a lot of users, 20, 30, 40s, even hundreds, it doesn't make sense to recreate those. But if you're currently using the local GUI for your local users, you can still keep them in there and just point to that. It just depends on if you want the extra features of VLAN assignments as well. You were showing assigning local users to specific VLANs. Can you assign radius AD users to specific VLANs as well? No. Unfortunately, when we have the option for, if we go back here for signing on, we have sign on with. So if you do AD or radius servers, it's going to be bound to whatever rules you have set up on the radius. So yes, you can do that, but you have to put the attribute in there for the radius for the users. The reason why, if we have it here for Nebula Cloud Authentication, is because our Cloud Authentication server is basically technically a radius where we put those attributes in. But if your radius server does support that, you can put that attribute in as well. And I'm trying to see if there's anything that I forgot to mention. Of course, if you want to get the Sector Extender clients, or you want to get the specific Sector Extender, we do offer the link that goes directly to our download page to download the software. The Sector Extender is licensed out, so the option is there if you want to use it. So again, I'll leave the floor open for a couple minutes for any other questions that you may have. I'm going to go double check and make sure that I answered everyone's questions. It looks like I have. All right, so if there's not any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and conclude this webinar. Again, I do thank you for joining this webinar. I will be doing a webinar next month on the differences between the local GUI and the Nebula cloud, and when to use both or either or. I know that it's a pretty hot topic when it comes to how which one is better to manage, whether it's better to manage locally or whether it's better to manage in the cloud. So that's going to be the next webinar that I will be doing. After that, I will be doing a deep dive into the Tailscale VPN and how to set that up. It's very exciting to be able to use Tailscale VPN. It does give you an extra option for your VPN connectivity. I'm sorry I wasn't really able to get into that on this webinar because it's pretty in-depth and it will probably take up the whole hour to do. Let's see, what is Zyxel doing about support for the built-in client for Mac OS Tahoe? It's not working for me. I will need to double check with our support staff and see what's going on. I know that every time that there is a update on Mac OS side, we have to make a slight change in how the script works. I know that for some people it works and for some people it doesn't. We're trying to find whatever difference it is between the two. But definitely I will check in with the support staff and see where they're at on that particular case. But like I said, Tailscale VPN, very excited about it. We'll do a deep dive on that. It'll probably be the first webinar that I do of 2026. So I look forward to presenting that to you. So until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, wonderful morning, and I hope to see you on the next webinar. This webinar was recorded and it should be available shortly after. So you'll be able to actually go through and watch it again at your leisure. So again, thank you so much for joining the webinar. I hope you guys have a wonderful morning and or afternoon. Thank you.